Lord Fish, written by Ted Cross, narrated by Rosa B. Watkinson. In this short story, you will be regaled with 3 short stories and a novelette consisting of Dragon Play, Lord Fish, and the Stolen Castle, and the Arrival. Hello, and welcome to the next episode in Mini March. So today I am looking at a short book called Lord Fish, Chronicles of Zax. So without further ado, let's jump right on in. So starting with the cover and title. Now, first with the cover, I want to start by saying I have to give this 5 stars because I really do like the way the cover looks. The author's name is a little bit easier to read than who it was narrated by. Lord Fish is pretty up there. If I could make any change to this, I would maybe make Lord Fish a little smaller and maybe fit in the Chronicles of Zax. Although I think this also could have used like a page or something explaining why this is called the Chronicles of Zax. But moving on. The title itself, I have to say, I understand it's one of the story names, and there's a reason why, which I'll dive into later. So, yeah, I'm giving this 5 stars. Now we're moving into the writing. And the writing, I'm going to have to give 4 stars to the writing. I think the stories could have been a pinch longer each. I think a little bit more detail, like a little bit more, could have been added. Like in the short story of the Stolen Castle, it just ended so abruptly, like I didn't even hardly notice we were moving on to the next story. Like I missed that. I missed something, you know. And it just felt like the next story just began. But yeah, I just think these stories need to be longer. And I understand it's, these are short stories, but also, like I said, I feel like it could have had a page that, something like a prologue. Not necessarily a prologue or but just something making it a little longer. Written from the point of view of the character Zax, so we understand why these stories are all together. Maybe that's something the author could do future down the road if he releases the paperback version, because right now it's only available on Kindle and Audiobook. I mean, so he could try it out with the Kindle and see how it does with the audiences that read Kindle books. Now we'll get into the narration, and for the narration, I'm going to give it 5 stars. Once again, Rosa B. Watkinson, who has read for Ted Cross before, did a fantastic job. I really liked the way she delivered the stories. If you are unfamiliar, the book I'm talking about is called The Shard. I reviewed it at the end of last month, and I'm reviewing this. This is connected to the book The Shard, The Chronicles of Zax. So, if you have not checked that out, please consider doing so. Honestly, in my opinion, well, I'll get to that at the end. Let's just save that. So, moving on to the story. And for the story, I'm going to have to give it 4 stars. The reason why is because there were only half of the, well, maybe I should say 3 stars. No, I guess I'll do 4. I didn't care for the first story. Dragon play. The second story, Lord Fish, tied really well as a prequel story to the main series. Stolen Castle, I went by so quickly I hardly even noticed it ended. And The Arrival, well, I'll talk more about that later after the final score, was really good too. So I only cared about 2 of the 4 stories. I didn't see a point for the Stolen Castle story. In fact, I honestly kind of thought it was like Lord Fish and the Stolen Castle were part of the same story. Like, this is what happened. Like, it was one big section because it included the same character, Lord Midas, from the previous book, The Shard. So I thought, oh, it's the same characters. It's, all part of the same story. I think in the future that this writer could make more short stories and use other characters from his book, The Shard, and then maybe release, like, after he does this a couple more times, maybe release one big book with all of them, in which he can make slight changes to the story. So, I think that's something that can be done. And if it ever was released as a paperback. But, yeah. So, moving on to the characters. And I'm going to give this 5 stars. Because the characters, although a good mass majority of them were characters we had read before in his other work, I really enjoyed seeing these characters again. And the new characters, they were there. They were a presence. And they weren't half bad. I enjoyed their time in the stories. So, as this is Mini March, we're not doing extras, so moving on to the final score. And I'm going to have to give this book an 8 out of 10. I do feel, I was conflicted to go lower. I was almost tempted to go a 7 out of 10. Because of the fact I only enjoyed half of the stories in here. But those stories were pretty good. And they overshined. And, it's not that I don't enjoy one of the 2 stories. I'll do a ranking here in a minute, but, there was one story I kind of enjoyed, but I had a reason why I didn't enjoy it as much. So, I think 8 out of 10 is pretty fair, because it didn't take a lot of time to get through this book. It only took about, I think it was like 2-3 hours for me to listen to it. Because most of the time when I'm listening to audiobooks, I'm working, and I got through this in one shift. So, I was able to do it while I was driving. and it was pretty easy, quick listen. Unlike, other audiobooks where it usually takes me about a week to get through it because it's hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of information. This one I was able to quickly listen to in one shift and absorb it all. And because I had already previously listened to Ted Cross's other books, it made understanding the world and everything that he was talking about quick and relatable too. So, before I go, since this is a book that has more than one story, I'm doing a bonus section here, which is the story rankings. So, coming in at number 4 is The Stolen Castle. I could probably go back and re-listen to it, and I got the basic gist of the story. These group of knights, they return. They go to this fort, which is supposed to be controlled by the king, but it's been taken over by bandits or something, so it's not like it's a big, huge fortress. These guys sneak in, attack the bandits rather quickly in their sleep, tie them up, and do something with them. I don't want to say in case you actually want to read it, but yeah, that's basically it. End of story. This was probably the shortest and quickest. So it didn't really, strike me as super important. I feel like more needed to be done. Maybe, have a few paragraphs where maybe they came across one that was actually awake and they got into a fight with them or something. I don't know. Just something needed to happen. This is, like I said, too quick, too easy, too over and done with. Coming in at number 3, the short story Dragon Play. So this basically, the biggest problem I had with this is a vast majority of this story was plagiarized or copied. And who was it copied or plagiarized from? Well, it was taken from Ted himself. He has there's this group of children. They're going into this place that has been taken over by a dragon. And several of the things that happen to these kids are beat for beat, word for word, same thing that happened to the main group in his other book, The Shard. And I'm like, well, if this was canon, then some of this doesn't make sense. And why are you having, there's this little girl who's feeling around in the dark, and she reaches out with both hands and grabs onto objects in front of her, one soft, one hard, and yanks, and the soft stuff comes away, and the hard stuff feels like it's being held back by something. Well, as I just said that's exactly how it's written, basically. And that exact same description is given to you with a character from The Shard who's also feeling around in the dark, comes across something in front of him in the dark, reaches out, grabs it, exactly the same. There are some minor differences, but they're not different enough. I almost wanted to put this at the very bottom if it wasn't for the fact that the stolen castle part was so forgettable. I probably would have put this at the very bottom. Number 2. I'm really tossed on this, but I'm going to have to say Lord Fish comes in at number 2. I was really hoping to make this number 1 because I really did enjoy this story very, very much. But this follows King Midas as he, is about to enter into a tournament against, other famous knights and nobles from around the, lands. And basically some stuff happens which almost reminded me of The Knight's Tale. I feel like this story's biggest downside is that it wasn't just a little bit longer. That we didn't get more, build up of the confrontation between the main two characters, which was Midas and this other guy. Now, at number 1 is The Arrival, which was the longest story in the group. I think this is following what is set up at the end of the Shard. And it revolves around characters from the Immortality game. Now, I said he did something very interesting. He had some very good setup. And I was really scared that he was going to go a certain direction, saying that everything in the Shard was all a video game, and that's how these one characters were in this other world. And I was like, oh, please don't go that route. But what he set up at the end of the Shard, I think this was a glimpse at the very beginning before the Shard. This short story. I think it's a very small glimpse. So, it would be interesting to see a little bit more dived into with this storyline. Because like I said, the ending is so interesting because you think you're reading just a straight up fantasy. But I don't want to say much. But that's why The Arrival is at number 1, because it helps support both of his other novels, and it ties them together. Something that, some of your best and most favorite authors tend to do. People like Stephen King, people like myself. I've been doing this too, with certain books and with certain, I didn't do this with my short stories. I considered it, but I have an entire series of books, whole ideas planned out. So this has been my review of Lord Fish, Chronicles of Zax. If you read the Shard and you've read the Immortality game, you're definitely going to want to check out this book. I myself also have plenty of short stories available on Amazon and Audible for you to check out. So if you like short stories, do me a favor to check out Lord Fish, sorry. Check out Lord Fish, and why not also check out a few of my short stories if you're into horror, because I generally tend to write horror short stories. I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you have not, please consider subscribing to this channel. Make sure to click that notification bell so you're notified when the new video goes up. And I will talk to you all next time. Bye.